All right, we have enough at our disposal to start the process of making games and learning more about objects. So objects are, we're going to get into it. It's a way that we can better organize our code and be able to do more by writing less. But we have, up to this point, we've learned conditionals, okay? And so this next project will really help solidify using conditionals because we're going to create like a taps per second game. So I'm going to kind of walk through the demo. So we're clicking as fast as we can. We click a start button. So let's see what that does. So that's my clicks per those 10-second time. That's now my high score. If I click the start again, I can beat that score. Now it's showing that as a new high score. And that is mine for this round. Again, I can just go ahead and click start again. And not very good. I could beat that. My mouse does not want to pick this up. Okay, so what we're seeing though is our high score will reset every time we beat that score, so we can challenge people. This will reset if we refresh the page, but we will hold permanence as long as we are playing the game. Every time we start, we go to some type of countdown timer where we're going red, yellow, green, and then we start clicking. We have 10 seconds to click, and we're counting up those clicks. When we finish that, if our clicks are greater than the high score, then that becomes our new high score and we can continue playing. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and make this game. And this, let's kind of talk about it based off what we've seen, because we kind of have multiple sections. All right, so here, I'll just call it a tap per second game. There is a couple things that we need to think when we have kind of sections. When we start the game, we go to basically a countdown timer. So we have a countdown to let us get ready. And then we have our game. And our game is going to run for 10 seconds. And count the clicks. 10 seconds. And then we have our end game, which will display the high score. Display high score. Okay. We do display instructions at the start, and then those kind of go away. So each of these are kind of like different sections of our game. So if we think about it like that, then we can basically check if we're in one of these sections and then go back and forth. We could use Boolean values to do this, Boolean, and variables for our timer. So we are going to start using some type of timer. Okay, Boolean values are only true or false. Okay, and we can use those to say, hey, if the game is not started, which the game would be all of this, if the game is not started, then we are displaying the instructions. And then when they press, to start the game, press that button, then game started changed from false to true, and then we can start the countdown. Then for the game, we could ask, is the countdown finished? If it is true, then we display this. If the game is finished, that means we have ran out of seconds, then we can display and ask if the game is ended. And we can just keep going through these steps to be able to follow through. So when we click that start, we can kind of reset our settings and go back. So we want an instructions, a countdown, a game for 10 seconds, an end game. We probably also need some type of reset that's going to go through the same values that we have so we can just keep resetting our game. Okay. So that will help us. And we're going to have to be embedding a lot of conditionals in this. A timer is something that is going to be tracking the time. Now, since we are actually going for seconds and stuff, then the piece of code that we want to use is called millis. Okay, and this is milliseconds. So milliseconds, it takes 1,000 milliseconds to equal 1 second. Okay, so we can use that to build out a timer because we're going to end up having to check things. Okay, so that should get us started. Let's quickly review a conditional. A conditional is okay. A conditional is a way for us to branch code, able to, well, this is getting a little bit annoying. It's correcting me on it. Okay, able to branch code, which is very, very useful. Okay. The question that we ask can only ever be true or false. It can never be anything else. Okay? So with that in mind, we want to look at, what do we need to write? So it always has 3 parts. The first part is the if statement. That is part 1, okay? And then here is our question. So this is the keyword to let us know that we go into it. And then we have a code block. All right, code block. So that is our 3 parts. This is part 1, part 2, and part 3. Okay? If this is true, okay, then the code block will execute. Okay, so that is a basic if statement. So if we only want to check if something is true, then we only run this. But we can have a little bit of variations. We can have, let me just move this out of the way a little bit. Actually, let me just do a different page. We can have an if. So if this is true, true, then we do that, okay? Or we can have if true, we do this, and then we can write an else with a code block, okay? So if this is true, do this if true, do this if false. Okay, that's if the question is false. Okay, but if we want to do more, so let's say that instead of 2 options, we might have 3 or 10 or 15 or 1,000. Okay, there are switch statements and there's other statements that we could do, but for the most part, if you have more than 2 options, then we have an if, we have an else if, Okay, and then we can ask another question. Okay, and we can keep going down to another one. We could say an else if we have our last option. Okay, so this would be, just get rid of some of that stuff. Okay, so when we're thinking about it, though, we can have an else if, we can have multiple of those. They aren't restricted to how many we can have. So this technically could be moved down below. So we could still do another one. We could do an else if again, and this can be another question. And we can keep moving down, asking different questions for whatever we need. When we get finished, the very last one, it does not require asking a question because it is our default. It's the last one that we do. So it would just be a code block. Okay? So looking at this in detail, this would be my first question. Okay, so this would be Q1. I want to check if this is true or false. Okay, if it's true, I do this right here until I get to this code block. I do not execute any of this if this first one is true. If this is false, then I come here and I ask a different question. Okay, if this one is true, then I execute everything inside of this code block from this line to this line. Okay, I'm never going to do anything else. Okay, now if, it's kind of annoying that it keeps doing that. If this is, question 2 is false, then I would come here and I would ask question 3 and just ask something that needs to be true or false. And I would execute this if it's true. If question 1, question 2, and question 3, if all of those are false, all of those if and else if statements are all false, then I come here and this is my default that I execute. So this is the default and I don't ask the question. It will just happen anyways. Okay, so you can build if ladders or conditional ladders using if and else if and else. You can build conditionals doing an if and an else. You can build conditionals doing an if and an else if and not do an else. Okay, so there's lots of ways that we can kind of design that. So that kind of gets us to where we need to go, and now we need to just start building our code. Okay, so let's come here. We're going to start a new sketch. Okay, and there's a couple things that we know that we're going to need. We need to know kind of where we are. So we need to know if our game started. Okay, and that's going to be true or false. We need to know if we are displaying the instructions, which is going to be if our game started or not. We need to know if the countdown timer is finished. Am I being really explicit with the names? We need to know if the game is finished. Okay. We need to know, so that will get me to the countdown. I will go from the countdown to the game. I will go from the game to the end screen. And then, I can choose what I'm displaying. So, other things that we need. So those are going to be Boolean values. Now we need other ones. We need ones for our click count, and then we need our max clicks. Okay, so that'd be like our max score, our high score. We need a game timer. So game timer we need our countdown timer. Okay, and those are going to be some values. We're going to end up having to have some instructions. Maybe let's do instructions 1. We're going to do instructions 2 for like when we're in the game. We want to display the clicks, and then we want to display the high score, so that we can all do kind of in code. Okay, so let's start building this out. Oh, we also need a button, so let's click on that. We need a button, so let's call it a start button. Okay, and then before we set those up, we already mentioned that we need certain functions to help organize our code, and this will make it a lot easier for us to know what parts we need to go to. So let's do a function we call display instructions. Okay, and in there, that's where we're going to display our instructions. We're going to display countdown timer. Okay, and that's going to be going from red, yellow to green, giving us kind of the countdown. Function play game. Function end game. Okay, so now all of these we're going to be going back and forth on what we're doing. So when we're in our setup, we're going to have to set up some values. We're going to use the draw to kind of go back and forth from these values between these, and then know what we need to do. So we're going to start kind of developing each one of those. Okay, so to start off, let's start defining all of our stuff in our setup. Okay. Game started is going to be false. Countdown timer is finished is going to be false. Game is finished is going to be false. So game started, it's going to be false. Countdown timer is finished is going to be false. And if you ever have an issue with making sure that you're naming stuff, you can just copy and paste and then define it. Okay, like this. All right, game is finished. All of those are going to be false. Okay, these will control when we go into certain functions. Can run. Okay. Now we need to set up our other values. We got to give default values for these. I'm just going to use the multi-click. Okay, so click count, that's going to start out at 0. The max clicks, that's going to start out at 0. Game timer, we want 10 seconds to do for a timer, but you may end up developing this to run based off of certain seconds that you wanted to do if you wanted to challenge other people. Countdown timer, we're setting this to 3, but we could change these values. Instructions 1 and 2, so let's pull those. Okay, instructions 1 is what we want to display. So this might be something like, and we could use a string literal. This would make it maybe a little bit easier. Okay. Click the start button. You will have $, game timer seconds, because we set that as 10, to click the mouse as many times as you can. Are you the fastest? Okay, so that looks pretty good. That's our instructions. Now our instructions 2 probably is going to be almost similar. We just need to display, you know, like when they're clicking. Click the mouse as fast as you can. Okay. And then we have our start button, which we already learned is create button. We got to give it a name. I'm going to call it start. And then the start button, we want to link that with function. So we haven't wrote this one, but what it needs to do is that when we click this function, we are changing the game from not being started to started. So the instruction should go away. We should be able to display we're, you know, running the countdown and then starting the game. So let's call it start game. That's the function that we want to run. Okay, so let's build that. So the start button mouse pressed, we have not written that yet. Function start game. And that means that game started, which was false, is now true. Okay. All right, so that's basically all it's doing. We can also do our reset. So there are certain things that we want to reset. These instructions, we don't really need to change what they are. This one we might, because this is a string literal. Okay, so this game timer is going to go off of this. If I ever tried to change my timer somewhere in the game, I would have to move this, so that would also get updated because that would become an event. Okay, but the game started. This could be this would all need to get reset. Okay. So, actually, that one's not going to get reset. So let's run our reset. We'll build it here. So function reset. If we have this get called right before start game, it's going to go from we're resetting it to it being true to it being false and then going back to true again. So this is probably not needed. This is going to just be flagging back and forth. So we can actually do this. Game started. That will be true, and then we won't display anything here. What are we doing? We're basically resetting. Okay. So we could do this. Now, why do I have a different function name? I could probably just call this reset. Yes, you could. You could have that button just linked to resetting the game, which in essence is what it's doing. But there are other times when we're starting the game that we're doing more than just resetting the stats. We're also loading different maps. We're setting our positions for our players. We're bringing us back to the menu screen. So I'm kind of keeping it broken down into the functions for what they do, and then we can use from there. So when we click the start game, we go to reset, which will set our default values back to what they originally were. Except for game started, it will become true, which means that we can come into the game. So our draw is what gets called all the time. So I can say if game started, okay, that means if it's true, then we are playing the game, okay? That's basically what we would get, okay? Else, what do we want to do? If we have not started the game, then we are displaying the instructions. So that's where we can come here, display instructions, okay? So that basically gives us the pieces, which means now we can start displaying the instructions. So on my display instructions, I want to display instructions 1, and I'm going to need to choose where I want that. We're going to start just using push and pop in everything because that will help keep us more organized. Push and pop will, if we change colors, if we change position, if we change text align, it will make it so it's only working for those one thing, for whatever it's being applied to. So anything that's written in between here, if we make changes to the stroke, the fill, the size, it will only display for this. Okay, so in here, I'm going to put a text size of, let's say, 18. I want to, let's do text align and just make it a little bit easier for me to display, but I am going to need to kind of position those instructions. So instruction 1, to do instructions 1, instructions 1. Okay, and I want to display that pretty close to the middle, and I'm going to play around with values. But width divide by 2, height divide by 2 is will not give me exactly center. Okay, and if I want to say, see, the benefit of us creating this as a variable is that I can actually, when we create a string, it also holds width and height. So I can say width divided by 2 minus instructions 1.width, and that will for sure center it. I can also say minus instructions 1.height, okay, and then I can give it a width and a height. Okay, instructions 1.width, instructions 1.height. Okay, just getting used to doing some stuff like that will be useful. We want to make sure that this is displaying. Okay, gamer timer is not defined. That's an error that we have. Okay, reset is a reserved name also. So there's a couple errors that we got to fix. Let's do reset game, and we're going to call this reset game. Okay, and then we have gamer timer. So I wrote that wrong somewhere. I have game timer here. Let's look at where that was written. Gamer timer at line 28. Game timer. Okay. Sketch 49 is expecting a number for the 5th parameter. 49. 1, 2, 3. Maybe it doesn't hold a height. Let's just double check. Let's just say giving the text a height of 200. It's not holding it. Instructions 1, unless I didn't write it right. So right here, we're going to check our code, and this is where I've talked about console log, but this becomes useful. Instructions 1. We'll just display that, make sure that that is there. Okay, so there's my instructions. Now let's check if it's got a width, undefined, length. There we go. Okay. Yeah. And it doesn't have height then. Okay, so that was my mistake. We do have a length because it's showing how many, but we don't actually have established width or anything yet. So we can still do this. Minus height. We're not going to be able to subtract that from there. We do have a size that we're doing, but it's length, not width. So let's run. We want no errors. We want to be able to display. Let's give that a value. Let's say 200. It's because when we just established that it had to be length, I still left it as height. Because instructions 1.height is undefined, width divided by 2 minus that doesn't exist. So again, let's rerun. Okay, there we go. Now it's displayed. Sometimes we get errors, we have to figure it out. Okay. I do want to bring this up. So let's bring it up some. Let's minus like 150 from it. That's too much. 100. Okay, that's not bad. All right. So now if I click this, it disappears. Okay, because when I click on the start, that calls this reset game, the start game, okay, for the button, which calls reset game, which game started to true. So in my flow, when I go to my draw, I'm not doing anything if once game started becomes true, but when it's false, I'm displaying the instructions. Okay, so that is working so far. So now I can start kind of stepping through, display the countdown timer. That's the next thing that I want to do. Okay, so I'm going to put in here display countdown timer. That's the next function that I want to call. I'm going to come in here and I want to start looking at this countdown timer that we have that goes from 3. This countdown timer, it goes 3. I want it to go 3, 2, 1, and then we start the game. Okay, but when it's at 3, I want to display red. When it's at 2, I want to display yellow. When it's at 1, I want to display green. And then as soon as that goes away, that's when we start clicking. Okay, so we need to start instituting a timer. Now, if I run, let's do millis, so we can see it. And there's a couple other ways to do this, but this would actually track for time. Okay, so that takes the current time. Let me stop it because it's calling. This is getting called based off of the milliseconds that it takes for everything. So I pulled what that current time is, okay, and that starts running as soon as setup is called. So if I get that start time, okay, if I get that start time and set it, then I can actually start subtracting from it. Okay, so here, the display countdown timer, we actually need a variable because we need to track current time, which is millis. This is going to give me the current time to when I wanted to give like my start time. So I got to mark where I want to have, like my stuff. So here, if we think of, time is kind of going like this, okay, millis is always going to point to wherever we're currently at. Okay, now if I want to do some type of marking where we are, if I want to do some type of marking, then I need to have a variable that I set as what those previous values are. So if I say do start time as a variable, and then I'm wanting to mark here, then I can pull the millis, save it there, and that's marking this. Okay, and then when I want to check what is the elapsed time, so that's elapsed time, like how long did it take? Okay, elapsed time, from here, I want to measure this time right here. It's going to be the elapsed time is going to be equal to the current time, which is millis, minus that start time. Okay, so I can keep setting this back and forth, but this will start giving me values. Okay, so that's what we ultimately need to do. We have to have a variable that's going to hold that. Okay, so we need a start time. So here, this is going to be a timer, so I'm going to have it up here. Start time. Okay. And then I need to control when that's happening. So start time is going to need to happen here. It's not going to get called until game started is true. So when we click that and we reset, that would be the first time that I want to do it. So here, this reset game, start time is going to be equal to whatever the millis is at that point. Okay, so if I do that, then I'm in my display countdown. So as I finish each section, I can just start minimizing them. Okay, so I want to start looking for time here. So the elapsed time is going to be equal to the millis minus that start time. Okay, so I can start asking if the elapsed time is greater than 1,000, okay, then a second has passed. We might be a couple milliseconds over a second, but we have identified that a second has passed. Okay, so a second has elapsed. All right, so if that happens, then and this countdown timer is going to happen, you know, every draw call, this is going to happen. So if that is the case, then my countdown timer is going to decrease by 1. Minus minus is a decrementer. This is a postfix decrementer. Okay, a postfix, because it comes afterwards, decrementor. This comes after my variable, so my variable will get called and then it's going to go down. For most cases, this won't matter so much, okay? But a postfix decrementer, this would be equivalent to writing countdown timer is equal to whatever the countdown timer was minus 1, okay? That's the same thing, okay? Me just saying this. It's just shorthand. I can also do plus plus, which means it would be a postfix incrementer, and it's like I'm adding 1 to it, okay? In this case, that's what I want. I want to decrease that timer by 1, and then I need to reset my start time, okay? Because I may be a little bit off. So I'm going to say start time is equal to whatever the millis's were at that point. And then I'm running through this again, okay? So this is my timer right here for my countdown, okay? Now, inside here, I'm going to start writing some if statements. I basically want to display a circle, okay? So we want a circle that's going to be a certain color, and let's say we want it to be at width divided by 2, height divided by 2, and we want it to be like 100. Okay, so in here we want to ask some questions on what we're going to use to fill it. So I'm going to write push here, and then I want to write pop after my circle. And then inside, I'm going to ask those questions. So if countdown timer is equal to 3, okay, and notice I'm using 2 equals, okay. 1 equal is not an equals, it's an is, it's an assignment operator. Okay, so if this is true, then my fill for that circle will be red, okay, red. So it's RGB. Okay. If it's not, then I would ask another question. Else if countdown timer is equal to 2. If that is true, my fill would be yellow. And I don't know what the RGB values for yellow would be, so let's look that up real quick. I want to be yellow. I like that yellow. I'm going to copy this. So it's mostly green and red and a little bit of blue. Okay, so that would be my color for my fill. If that is not true, then it means that countdown timer is equal to 1. If it's equal to 1, we should be green. So red, green, blue. That would be the color that I want that circle. We want to keep going down, right? So if we are not 3, 2, or 1, then that means we are at 0. Okay? If we are at 0, what do I want? The countdown timer is finished. So that's that first thing that we needed to have. This countdown timer is finished. This needs to go from false to true. Okay, so we're here. This becomes true. All right. Now, yeah. So the only thing, what I want to happen in my display timer, I really only want this display countdown timer to display as long as the countdown timer is not finished. Okay? So we want to make a little bit of changes. We're going to put all of this inside of a conditional. We're going to say if this is not true. Okay? Now this was, remember, only true or false. The not operator, and we've talked about this before, but it is the exclamation mark. So this will negate something. Okay? The not operator is going to be either true or false. Okay? So if something is true, okay, not operator is false. Okay. If something is not false, then it becomes true. Okay. So that's how we can kind of reverse things. This becomes a switch. Okay. If we want to make it like a true switch, which in future projects we will, we can use that variable. So let's say, I don't know, I call it switch. And I set it to false. If I just wanted to switch it to the opposite, then I could write it as switch is equal to not switch. So let's just step that through. If it starts out as false, not false is true, so switch becomes true. All right. Now, this, if it is true, let's step through it. Not true. Okay, not true is false. So this becomes false, so switch becomes false. So I can just go back and forth. There are plenty of cases that we will want to do that. In this case, though, we really only need to do this once. Okay, so if countdown timer is not finished, all right, and I am opening this up. This is the start of my code block. I'm going to go all the way to the bottom of my code after my pop from the circle. And I'm going to close it out. Okay, just so we can see what that looks like, this is all minimized. So this if statement is holding everything. Okay, if it's not holding everything, it's going to cause you some issues. So now my display countdown timer, when that starts, is going to give the colors. So we want to check that this is working, and it should show red, yellow, green, and then it should disappear. So we click start. Bam, that looks awesome. Okay. That is, I'm going to stop the video here with your challenge for this step. Okay. the display that I gave is pretty rudimentary. We have a red, yellow, green. Your challenge that I want is for you to find 3 images. Okay? Your 3 images are going to be of a traffic light. Okay? And I want you to have one where it has the red, one that has the yellow, one that has the green. And you're going to switch the image instead of displaying the circle. So instead of us doing this and a circle, we are just going to display the image. And I want you to have the image centered on the screen. So we might want to change the image mode to center and then put it in the center of the screen. We have it switch those images. Okay, so this will get changed out. The display countdown timer will get changed out with those 3 images. So your challenge 1, is going to be traffic light for countdown display. All right. And I also would like us to do sound of like red, yellow, green, but you guys haven't learned that yet. If you wanted an additional challenge to help you get some extra credit, this is not required, but if you read the references for sound, it's fairly easy. The red, yellow, green, like we're at the starting blocks for a race. Green sounds for us to start the game, okay? If you add those, that will be extra credit. Okay, so that's where I'm going to stop the video. What we did is we added our instructions. We set up that function. We set up all these variables. We started using a timer, understanding what the timer was doing. We had it start counting by seconds, and then we're using that to do our countdown timer to change the colors of a circle from red, yellow to green. Red, yellow, green. I want you guys to do the challenge of making that traffic lights red, yellow, green for the lights changing. All right. The next video that we're going to be doing is going to be working on setting the game up, and then we want to do our max score. All right. Good luck. Have fun.